The purpose of this talk is not to discuss a political issue. It's not to take a stand with the right or take a stand with the left. My purpose tonight is to defend a man, a great man, George Washington, my hero. A man that should not need defending in America. Yet, as I record this video, there are American citizens who seek to destroy his legacy. Now, I don't know if these people have hate in their hearts or if they are simply misguided, but I do know we all have an obligation to care. George Washington was the most important of the founding fathers. For all the greatness of the other incredible founders, none of their accomplishments could have blossomed into the freedoms and prosperity our nation has enjoyed up until this point. He wanted nothing more than to be a good and honest man. His contemporaries found it difficult to comprehend the magnitude of his grand air and raw leadership quality. In the Revolutionary War, he led with incredible bravery. When his troops wanted to retreat, he would run into the front of them and lead the charge in front of his men, horses being shot out from under him, bullet holes through his coat, leading bravely with 1,000 deaths flying around him. He was not thinking of himself. At the end of the American Revolution, in 1783, George Washington found himself with immense executive power, the entire winning army at his disposal, under his command. It was time for him to grab total power and seize the moment and rule the new nation at the absolute seat of power. But that never happened. George Washington surrendered his military commission back to the People's Congress, voluntarily relinquishing all power, and he shocked the world. No other conquering general had done that before. When King George III of Great Britain, Washington's enemy in the war, heard that he might do this, that after winning the revolution, Washington might give back power to the people, the king is to have said, if he does that, if Washington does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. And he did. And he was. Without Washington, the United States of America would not exist. But today, for some, a few, that doesn't matter. Because George Washington owned slaves. This tragic reality of mankind's existence is extraordinarily troubling and disturbing to us as modern day people. But what is also tragic is for us to not understand how to analyze and consider history. We must learn from those who came before us, and we should judge them based on the standards of their time. The step-by-step progress throughout history our ancestors made enabled us to become more virtuous, for us to have increased standards of morality. George Washington is not the founding father of slavery. Nobody reveres George Washington because he owned slaves. Statues and monuments are built to honor the nation that he brought us, all the benefits of a free society. People's morality, it evolves over time, and Washington's did too. In the Bible, and whether you believe the Bible is a holy text from God or not, we can all agree on its seriousness, the influence it had on mankind, and extreme wisdom. The Bible talks about Noah, the story of the great flood. It states that Noah was a good man in his age, or in his generation. You see, in the chronology of the Bible, it recognizes that if the Bible was to judge Noah based on, say, the law of Moses, Noah would not have been a good man. Noah was not following those laws. But understanding that those laws were not the common standards of Noah's time, who lived hundreds of years before the law of Moses, he was to be judged based on the standards of his time. The arrogance of judging figures based on current moral standards, albeit unalienable and undeniable, pure and good standards, is that you disregard all those figures did to set the seed for delivery of those standards. If it was not for the progress of those that came before us, including and especially Washington, society would not have evolved to the place it currently is. For thousands of years, nearly all of mankind enslaved other human beings. It was not until after the Enlightenment period and fueled by Christians, especially Quakers, that the sin of slavery began to be corrected on a mass scale. All societies had slavery. The Egyptians enslaved the Jews and others. Thousands of years ago, Aristotle believed that humans came in two types: slaves and non-slaves. Muhammad, the founder of Islam, had slaves. There were Native American tribes that had slaves. African kingdoms had slaves and sold African slaves to Europeans. Abraham, the father of the Islamic, Jewish, and Christian faiths, had slaves. The point is not that this is a justification for slavery or an attack on any of those figures or societies. It is a harsh reality that if you judge people based on current standards that evolved due to many of their works and good progress, you are destroying good progress. A nation that attacks its own history cannot survive. We must discuss and learn, but not tear down while benefiting from the progress made by others who came before us. Mount Vernon, the estate of George Washington, takes this very seriously. They do an excellent job of honoring George Washington and honoring the hundreds of enslaved human beings who labored, lived, and died there. They honor them, and they honor Washington. Nobody honors Washington for being a slave owner. They honor him for changing the world's path. Some things that were once part of mankind's life are correctly known to be abhorrent now. During the middle of Washington's life, the disgusting nature of slavery was just being called into question wide scale. Just as Western society began to evolve and see slavery for the evil it was, so did Washington himself. He wrote to his dear friend, the Marquis de Lafayette, that he hopes to discuss a plan to end slavery. To Robert Morris, he wrote that there was not a man living who wishes more sincerely to see a plan adopted for the abolition of slavery through the legislative authority. Famously, at the end of George Washington's life, he freed all of his slaves. Of course, we can all look back and wish that the world was different then. We could wish that the status of moral evolution was already at its apex, but it wasn't. And we must judge people of history based on that. Washington was a man, not an angel of pure perfection, but he was a humble, great, and good man who gave himself to the country over and over again. When called back to the people to serve again late in his life, he thought, have I not done enough for my country? He knew the answer. His country called upon him again, and he knew, by his standards, he could never do enough, and he served. He did not give up on us. To tear him down is to tear you and me down. Our great progress, our healing, our path corrections. By delegitimizing George Washington, you delegitimize the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all of the amendments, including the Civil Rights Amendments. Everything comes crumbling down. It is time to stand up and defend our founding fathers. We are a good people. We love our neighbor. We can talk and discuss. We can still be George Washington's America.